Well, hey, you guys, welcome back to the salon. As you can see, we're getting back into doing reviews of our night gallery episodes. So, next up on the docket is going to be season 2, episode 16. And this is another one, like the last one that we talked about, that was 3 stories. This time around, all 3 of the stories were at least decent, even the more kind of comic themed one in the middle. I will admit they were all a little bit slow moving, but they were all at least worth watching. So the first story, which in my opinion was probably like the best of the bunch, is Lindamann's Catch. And that was written by Rod Serling, directed by Jeff Corey. And it's set in what we're led to presume is like a seaport in New England somewhere. So the story opens on this dockside tavern type situation, and all the old salts are in there kind of boozing it up and taking a breather in between their excursions in their fishing boats, right? So there's this local guy, and you're led to assume, again, like a regular named Abner Suggs, and he offers to tell fortunes for everybody in there. And he has like all these kind of soothsaying items, you know what I mean? Like tarot cards and crystals and shit like that. But everybody seems to be pretty much ignoring him. And then comes in the titular Captain Lindemann, who's actually played by Stuart Whitman. And he just turned up in a 1964 movie called Shock Treatment that I reviewed like over on my other channel not too long ago. Like, weirdly enough, it's just strange that he turned up in 2 things that I watched like within a few days of each other, and I didn't even mean to do that. So he's playing this kind of grizzled old coot, and clearly not a people person, I'm going to say. And he's just in there like kind of waxing on and on about how miserable the life of a fisherman is and how he knows it's eventually going to be the death of him and so forth. The monologue here is actually pretty great, by the way. It really kind of sells this guy as this just really world-weary sourpuss who basically like loathes his own existence. So Abner tries to have kind of a friendly conversation with the guy, talking about his predictions and stuff. And it's pretty obvious that this is maybe like a regular occurrence because within a couple of minutes, Lindemann has decided he's had enough of this fortune teller shit for one evening and basically slaps the ever-loving piss out of him. You know what I mean? So the poor guy has, a bloody lip and everything like that, and he's laying on the floor. And he just tells everybody, he's like, man, you have no love in you for anything or anybody. Now, shortly after this, like, no one does anything to help Abner anyway. They're just like, man, he probably had it coming. You know what I mean? So a few minutes after that, some of the other sailors are kind of start shouting from outside. And everybody rushes out from like to the dock to see what all the commotion is. And they're all kind of staring in wonder, like in Lindamann's boat. At first, like the audience can't see what they're looking at. And then Lindemann kind of takes a peek in there too and starts screaming his beardy little head off. So it turns out that apparently, unbeknownst to him somehow, Lindemann has caught an honest-to-goodness mermaid in his fishing net. So it's a very beautiful woman with fishtail and everything like that. She's, topless, but they have her hair like strategically kind of over so you can't see anything. And she's in noticeable distress. She can't talk, and she's kind of reaching out to the men like she's asking for help, you know what I mean? But she can't say anything. Now, almost immediately, the sailors start planning on selling her to a traveling carnival, like for profit. And I was like, that's nice, classy. But Lindemann is weirdly enraged by the whole situation. Like, he basically calls her an affront to all that's good and holy. And he says that he's going to kill her because she shouldn't be there. She shouldn't exist. Bit of an overreaction, I reckon. But, that's kind of his character. He's kind of portrayed as this hateful old curmudgeon, so I guess I probably shouldn't have been surprised. So the other guys are actually able to talk Lindemann out of his murderous impulses, for the time being at least. But they still seem to be scheming behind his back about how they're going to spirit the mermaid away and sell her before she inevitably dies, because she's not a land creature, obviously. So we then skip ahead a couple of days, and it's revealed that not only is the mermaid still in the hold of Lindamann's boat, but Lindemann himself hasn't been seen, like, since he caught her. Now, you might be thinking, as I was, that Lindemann had a change of heart and, maybe discovered he was all about the fish loving. You know what I'm saying? And I guess you'd at least partially be right. Actually, I think you'd completely be right. They can't they can't like have him be in love with a fish, I guess, in this, or they can't say it outright, but it's pretty clear that that's what's going on. So Lindamman at last emerges from his boat and he comes into the tavern and he tracks down the town doctor to ask him to give the mermaid some medicine because she's dying. I mean, obviously, she's not going to live that long because it's not her environment. So the doctor, quite reasonably, argues that the mermaid belongs in the sea and that maybe Lindemann should, put her back where he found her, right? But Lindemann, like I said, seems to have fallen in love with the creature and refuses to let her go. And he starts saying stuff like, him and her have been communicating without words, which I was like, does that mean what I think it means? Probably. So Abner hears about the captain's predicament. And wouldn't you know it? But amid this vast collection of tarot cards and crystals and potions and tinctures that he has, he just so happens to have a concoction that should, at least theoretically, turn the mermaid into a human woman. Why Abner would have a magic elixir for this very specific, and I would imagine unusually rare problem, is never explained. But Lindamman is desperate, and he doesn't question it. He just gives the blue Windex-looking shit to the mermaid off-screen, and kind of hopes for a miracle, I guess. Now, at first, it would appear that he has gotten this miracle. He climbs down into the hold, I think it's the next morning, and he's delighted to see a pair of shapely and very human legs sticking out from under the blanket, where previously there had been nothing but a shiny fishtail, right? He's so elated, you know where this is going, that he doesn't even bother to pull the blanket away, and he rushes back up on deck to tell the other sailors what's happened. It's like, she turned into a human woman, hooray, you know what I mean? Now, like I said, because this is a horror story, and because Lindemann very pointedly did not look under the blanket, you could probably guess where this is going. So the former mermaid staggers up from the hold on her very unsteady human legs. Obviously, she's not used to walking with legs, but it's quickly revealed that the potion has transformed her into something of a butterface, let's put it that way, because her upper half, mostly just her head, is now a fish. And the bottom half of her is human. So she makes a couple fishy faces at the men, staring at them with these bulbous fishy eyes that she has, and then jumps back into the sea. No doubt to be rejected as a mutant by her mermaid brethren and family. Now, Lindemann is heartbroken by this and leaps in after her and presumably drowns because the men are seen later that night throwing a black wreath onto the surface of the water, in memorial. So yeah, Lindemann's catch, the story, it's pretty ponderously paced, I guess, but man, it had spooky atmosphere for days. I really like these kind of nautical kind of themed stories like this, and Stuart Whitman's performance as Captain Lindemann was outstanding. He was really good. Once he gave the mermaid the change-up juice, it's pretty obvious how the story was going to end, but I didn't really mind that all that much. And I'm going to say that the fish face effect on her, clearly low budget, but it was actually pretty effective and creepy looking. So I think this was a pretty solid story for sure. Now, the next story, which is called The Late Mr. Peddington, was kind of a little bit more on the funny side. Not zany funny like some of the other ones, but, just a little bit more blackly comedic, I guess. And the whole story consists almost entirely of two people in an office talking. Despite this, it's actually still pretty entertaining. This one was also directed by Jeff Corey, and it was based on a short story called The Flat Male by Frank Sisk. I will also note that the painting that introduced this segment was easily one of the most hilariously gruesome ones ever featured on the show. And I'm going to show it right here because check this fucking thing out. So Thaddeus Conway, who's played by Harry Morgan, matter of fact, who was on MASH, wasn't he? And a million other things. He runs a mortuary. And one fine day, he gets a visit from a potential client named Cora Peddington. She starts asking him about funerary options. I mean, obviously, it's mortuary. And her big thing is she wants to keep things as budget-friendly as possible. So she goes on and on for a bit before she even kind of thinks to name the recipient of the funerary services, which turns out to be her husband, Adam. Now, Conway can't help but notice that the widow Pettington doesn't really seem too broken up about her spouse's death. And she explains to him when he asks about it, it's like, oh, he was always so consumed with business and making money that they never really had much of a relationship. Like, they didn't even have a honeymoon, she says. To which the slightly elderly Conway counters, well, I never even had a marriage. And I was just like, this isn't the Misery Olympics, bro. Like, not everything is about you. So when Conway asks what happened to the deceased, Cora tells him in a kind of amused tone, I felt, that the balcony on their apartment, she says, it had to be removed because it was old and it was crumbling, right? And it was going to be replaced at a later time. Now, because her husband was gone from home on business so much, she just plumb forgot to tell Adam that the new balcony hadn't been installed yet. So when he swanned out to get some air, he plummeted several stories to splatter spectacularly on the concrete below. So Conway makes some kind of sympathetic noises and asks about what types of options Cora wants for her husband's funeral. She basically tells him that she wants it as cheap as possible. No frills, no service, no coffin. She's like, matter of fact, can't we just stuff him in a basket or like a cardboard box or some shit like that? Can't we just throw him in a dumpster? Come on. Now, Conway does seem amenable to her penny pinching, but says, surely you must have some insurance money coming to you at the very least, because Mr. Pettington was well known as being like quite a wealthy dude, right? So Cora says, yeah, about that. Adam was indeed loaded, and his estate is worth like a fuck ton of money. But he was also like a real fucking tightwad. And there was a stipulation in his will that Cora was only to receive $2,000 to live on for 2 years, as this was the amount that he had lived on when he first started his business, many years ago, when obviously the cost of living was, of course, much less. Cora is not allowed to get charity, and she's not permitted to work to supplement this amount. If she does, her husband's entire estate goes to some charitable organization, and she doesn't get a dime. Now, there is a double indemnity clause that she explains. She says, so if Adam were to, say, die in an accident, Cora would actually get $4,000 to live on for 2 years, which still isn't shit, even in the early 1970s, but it's better than just $2,000, right? $4,000 is better than $2,000. So Cora is now hoping that Conway understands that she has this really dire need to economize because she's pretty much broke. So Conway says, yes, I completely understand, and I will do what I can to accommodate you. But she still leaves without finalizing the deal. And then Conway is talking to his assistant, fun fact, played by a very young Randy Quaid, who I recognize like immediately. I'm like, holy cow. He has like one line. He says, well, I'm not really worried about Cora taking her business elsewhere. Like, for one thing, our mortuary can undercut anyone else in town. Okay, fair enough. And for another thing, Conway is pretty sure he's figured out that Cora hasn't actually killed her husband yet, but is still like testing the waters before she goes through with engineering the accident. And then this is actually confirmed by a pretty hilarious and very abrupt like smash cut to this floppy man-sized dummy falling down the side of a building with an overdubbed shriek. It's pretty funny. So this story was also a good time, even though it was pretty much all dialogue, and it never really left its single location. So it's like a bottle episode, you know what I mean? It was pretty obvious from the jump, again, that Cora had killed or was planning on killing her husband, so the twist wasn't really shocking or anything. But I feel like the acting and the sort of amusing interactions between the characters like made this one worth watching. Now, the final story, which is called A Feast of Blood, was directed by Gino Schwark, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing. He's the same guy that did one of the Jaws movies, either Jaws 3D or Jaws 4, I can't remember. And it was actually based on a short story called The Fur Brooch by Dulcie Gray. Brooch? I don't know. It's also a decent installment, this one. It's a little murky in its lore, I'm going to say. And the monster is slightly ridiculous, but at least it's original. So Sandra Locke is in this. She was married to Clint Eastwood for a while, wasn't she? So she's in this, and she's playing this woman named Sheila, who is just this beautiful young woman who lives with her busybody mom, who's actually played by Hermione Baddeley, who I recognized immediately from Mary Poppins. She has a young and someone you don't see in the episode, like a suitor named John, and she's hoping that he will propose like someday soon. But her mom is just constantly encouraging her to date this other, much older, wealthier fellow, a very transparently creepy dude named Henry. Now, Henry is constantly bringing gifts and taking Sheila out to like nice restaurants and shit like that. But Sheila really is not into him. And I can't say I blame her, honestly. And she really isn't afraid to make that fact glaringly apparent. So early in the story, Henry arrives to take Sheila out to dinner. And he brings her this gift of this weird ass brooch that looks like a tiny, furry shrew, kind of, with like red eyes. And it has like a gold pin and a chain like running through it that you use it to like clip onto your clothes, right? Like Sheila thinks it's ugly and weird, which, yeah, it is. But her mom kind of encourages, yeah, just put it on your coat and go out to dinner with the creepy old man like a good girl. You know what I mean? Because he's got money. Now, because of how the brooch looks, and because there's a scene where Henry smiles kind of leeringly at Sheila in the doorway, and it kind of looks like he has fangs, I thought Henry was going to turn out to be a vampire. Like, the story is called A Feast of Blood, right? So I thought that's where this was going. But it turns out that that's not really what's going on. So the two of them go out to this fancy schmancy restaurant. And Henry basically tells her, well, you know, your boyfriend, John, is probably never going to propose. And, you know, you need to throw in your lot with Uncle Creeper here instead, right? Now, Sheila dismisses him. Like, she's like, look, I love John, whether he proposes or not. And, you know, you're not going to change my mind about giving your creepy ass a chance, right? And then Henry this was not really endearing to her anymore, but he makes this startling claim, right? That he's good at everything. Like, Sheila just starts mocking him like mercilessly about that. Oh, good at everything, huh? You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, go you. And he also reveals that he has some kind of undisclosed secret of some kind that made him good at everything. And then he tells Sheila about the brooch that he gave her and how it's based on a very, very rare kind of mouse that's similar to a bat. See, there's that vampire thing again, but it's not a vampire. He further says that the thing has this special clasp that keeps it from falling off like ever. So it's like magical or something. Now, when Sheila observes that he's talking about this brooch like it's alive, he does this really like sinister Grinch smile and he's like, am I? How silly of me. Wonder what could be going on with that. So after ages and ages of listening to this insufferable freak droning on and on, Sheila says, you know, I'd like to go home, please. And by the way, don't call me for another date because it ain't happening. You know what I mean? And again, I feel her. I feel it, you know. Henry seems to be gracious at first and starts to drive her home, but he's still trying to convince her to be with him. And she is just digging her heels in, like refusing him. And like I said, I don't blame her. Finally, he stops the car and grabs her, forcefully trying to kiss her, which again, get the fuck away from this dude, you know what I mean? And at this point, she rightfully jumps out the car, you know, tells him in no uncertain terms to just fuck off. She doesn't say that on the show, but that's what she means. And she's going to be walking home, even though she's on this dark, lonely road out in the middle of nowhere. He basically tells her, well, you made your choice, and then he peels off. Now, as she's walking, we start to notice that her little mouse brooch seems to be like moving of its own accord, like slowly kind of crawling up toward her face. Like every time they cut away from her and cut back, it's like a little bit closer to her face. You know what I mean? Now, when she realizes this, she wigs out and breaks into a run, but oddly does not think of just shrugging out of the coat that the brooch is attached to. It's on her coat. It's not on her actual clothes. Even if it was on her actual clothes, she could just like take off her blouse or dress or whatever the fuck she was wearing. But she doesn't think to do that. She just like tries to run away from it, even though it's right there. You know what I mean? And then we cut to like a very sudden shot of her, which is kind of hilarious actually, where the brooch is grown to like roughly the size of a beach ball. Like it's this with these big round red eyes, like big convex dinner plates. You know, it's just like a giant shrew or like a giant mouse or something like that. So she screams, and I'm presuming like the giant, you know, brooch mouse partially eats her or drains her blood, I guess. And her mangled, bloody corpse is discovered like a little while later by two drunk guys on bicycles. Probably not the way that she imagined her life would end. I would think getting slaughtered by this fuzzy, tacky, ambulatory accessory. But, you know, here we are. And then in the coda, we see Henry kind of sleazing up to this other beautiful woman at a bar. And so the cycle starts anew. I'm not entirely sure like where exactly he gets these mouse brooches from, what exactly they are or do, or why he thinks that killing resistant women with them will result in him finding a beautiful wife, if indeed that's what his end game is. In his defense, maybe he really is playing 5D chess here, and I'm just too dumb to see it. So this one was fine. It's a little silly in places and sort of out there. I mean, it's kind of a weird premise, like when you think about it, but it was still like pretty enjoyable. Like Henry was such an overt weirdo that I'm shocked that he got any woman, hot or not, like to even give him the time of day. But then I was thinking, well, maybe the magic or whatever, like behind the mouse brooches, like also made him appealing to the opposite sex, at least at first. I think I liked this one about equally to the second story, even though they were completely different in tone. I think maybe the second story was slightly better. So that wraps up season 2, episode 16. There are only 6 episodes left in season 2, and I'll get around to them all eventually before we power on to the shorter season 3, where I believe in season 3, they dispensed with the whole, 2 or 3 stories on each episode, and just each episode was just one contained story. If I'm remembering correctly, because it's been a while. But yeah, we'll get there in time. So hopefully you guys will keep watching this space for whenever the next one drops. So thank you once again for visiting the salon. Remember, if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.